Hello, everybody, and welcome again to a very exciting episode of You're Just Stupid, the podcast that makes you smarter and dumber at the same time. Y'all know me, my name's Rene, and I enjoy the brown Skittles. And I have a big update for you guys. Ray is out of the country. She is looking to establish stone. She is actually in Croatia right now as we speak, physically, mentally, spiritually. So she's not here today. And we all know that listening to me talk for fucking 45 minutes would be the most boring thing ever. So instead, I have the other co-founder of You're Just Stupid with us. And let me introduce him. He is the world's largest aborted fetus, Gus. Say hi, Gus.
Hi, Gus.
Uh-oh. It's going to be one of those episodes. It's going to be one of those episodes.
Well, it's good to freaking finally be here. You sons of bitches did this without me, but it's all good.
No, so just to give you all a quick background, You're Just Stupid is a three-way, hi-oh, collaboration between Gus, Ray, and myself. We've been looking to get Gus on, and finally, now that we got rid of the excess baggage known as Ray, we, lean, mean machine here of Gus and Rene.
Unfortunately, life is a bitch, and it kept me from getting on with these guys, but I'm here. I'll be coming on whenever I get the opportunity.
He'll be coming a lot, actually.
I do come all the time.
He comes a lot.
Usually alone in the dark, but still, I'll be trying to get on with these guys in here whenever I can, whenever they allow me to jump back into three-way.
Exactly. So he'll be part of our three-ways, and I hope all of y'all enjoy our three-ways as well. So
lots of noises.
Lots of noises.
Lots of
lube. And speaking of lube, we're gonna ease Gus in today. This is his first episode ever, guys. So I'm not gonna lie. Normally, I wait to. Damn it! I wait to surprise Ray with my topic, but I already gave it to Gus. I eased him in. Lots of lube.
Kind of dumb.
Afterwards I tossed the salad a little bit, eased him up, and afterwards I'm gonna take him to dinner and maybe even cuddle a little bit. So
I did have the cord wrapped around me for a while when I was in utero. So
look, those were the weak brain cells. They need to be cold anyways. So actually today's episode, as Gus already knows, is going to basically be like the origin of pro wrestling. So pro wrestling itself is going to get its own origin story. So what do you? Let's just introduce Gus. What do you know about pro wrestling?
I know quite a bit, but I will say this: that when you started telling me about how deep you're getting into it, I thought I knew enough because I've gone into the Wikipedia rabbit hole of fucking wrestling.
Look, if you haven't gone down the Wikipedia rabbit hole on at least one topic, are you really our podcast listeners?
But what you're bringing up is like even beyond me. So I'm going to be learning, and as I'm learning, I'm going to be trying desperately to fucking ruin your fucking episode with my fucking bullshit.
All right, excellent. Well, you know what? I think we're ready. I think the audience is ready to learn, and just kind of give a brief background. Gus and myself, we both like pro wrestling. We've both been to pro wrestling. Gus was telling me before the episode started, he's been to WrestleMania. I've been to the Royal Rumble. I just went to AEW last month, and like a jackass, I forgot to invite Gus.
This point forward, wrestling comes to town.
We're both going. We're both going. So let's talk about when wrestling first came back to town, way back in there. We're going all the way back. How far back do you think really modern, there was always people who wrestled. It goes back to the Greek Roman days. We're not talking about that shit. We're advancing forward. We want to talk about professional wrestling, where people made money off of this.
Well, I know it used to be a sideshow shit, like in the carnivals.
That's basically how it started.
I mean, like before the 1900s. I mean,
yeah. We're talking about 1800s. So you're getting like 1800s Europe. Like, I believe for what I saw, actually, it seemed like the earliest origins was like 1830s France. That's how far back it goes. Now, France isn't going to be a major player for long in this.
Yeah, hello, Andre the Giant.
Okay, well, besides Andre the Giant. But, yeah, other than that, we're really going to focus on 4 countries.
Okay, sorry, before we get to it, if you're talking about France, the only good thing that ever come out of there are fries and Andre the Giant. Let's get that straight.
And Andre the Giant because he ate so many fries.
Exactly.
And he drank a lot of beer.
The rest, anything else to do with France?
First of all, big shout out to Andre the Giant. Big shout out. Clink. All right, we're clinking on that one. Big shout out to Andre the Giant. Some say he's drinking 100 beers in heaven right now.
Oh man, if that and more.
And more. Anyways, and already back then, people kind of promoted themselves with these names. Like, they would call themselves the Phantom and other things. But very basic, very rudimentary. But we're going to fast forward into, like late 1800s, and really the origin of this is England. And we're going to talk about 4 countries specifically where pro wrestling and the modern style is really originated. And if you know anything about wrestling, you probably already know these 4 countries: the UK, the US, Mexico, and Japan. So, and even nowadays, pretty much, if you say what are some of the 4 biggest countries, maybe Canada a little bit also.
They're Canada's America's hat. They fucking do whatever we do.
First of all, big shout out to Bret Hart. Big shout out to Bret Hart. Anyways, but basically wrestling, or at least from what my little bit of research I've done, I've seen that a lot of wrestling has grown and evolved in those 4 countries. So basically in the 1800s, it takes off as a sideshow attraction, and especially in England, it was like they had a big circus to come in town, and it would be these big athletic competitions. So they would have bodybuilding and strongmen. They would have these wrestling matches, and when you think of wrestling, we're talking about like old school Greco-Roman wrestling. Really was this big carnival when really basically wrestling kind of broke down into kind of like the Olympic style. There's old Greco-Roman, which was very using locks above the waist, and it's kind of what you think of as, lack of a better word, the more boring style. You had these takedowns and holds, and it kind of started evolving. And they believe even in the 1800s, they have what we called worked or fixed matches. So basically, when you have a work, it means that basically before the match goes, basically people agree on the outcome. We're going to do a work versus a shoot is a real straight match. So when we think of, fake versus real, we're not going to use those. We're going to use the more wrestling terms, which are work and shoot. So a shoot match is like I flip this table over and Gus starts whooping my ass. Of a work is I flip this table, Gus and me start fighting, and we agreed, hey, after about 5 minutes, I throw a punch at Gus, he goes down, I pin him 1, 2, 3, I'm the new champion.
Got you.
So there was already a lot of talk about that, but really it was starting in the 1900s. So I'm going to introduce our first kind of big figure of the day. His name is George Hackenschmidt. If you know anything about pro wrestling, this name should ring familiar. But if you don't, we're going to talk about why he's important. So he's actually Russian. And long story short, as a kid, he worked as a blacksmith apprentice. He worked out a lot. He was very, very big into fitness. Like if you look at him, he is cut, he's muscular, he has good definition. He looks more like a modern bodybuilder, and this is like the late 1800s, early 1900s. So he's ripped. He's really big into fitness. And actually, fun fact, the hack squat?
Yeah.
You know why it's called the hack squat?
Yeah,
Hackenschmidt.
Is that what
he invented it? He may have even invented the bench press. There's kind of some debate whether he invented it or it might have been around. But basically, a more modern version of the bench press was definitely invented by him.
No, it's actually, I believe the bench press was created by a Jewish man named David Benchberger.
Oh shit, that's right.
That's a different podcast.
Yeah, different podcast. That's a World of Sweaty Men podcast,
or Benchstein or something like that.
Yeah. We might start that one next week.
Yeah.
But anyways, so George Hackenschmidt. He starts wrestling in Russia, winning a lot of matches. And these are real matches. These are shoots. He's strong. He's talented. He's got good endurance. And then eventually he starts making his way over to the United Kingdom. And he's wrestling. He's winning. Like he won. There was some 40-day tournament they had. He won the whole thing. So he's a young guy. He's really taking off. Well, eventually he beats the European champion. They have basically they really didn't have. They had champions, but they were just like, oh, this is the champion. They presented the fair, and these were real work. These are real shoot matches. And then eventually he comes over to the United States, and let me just real quick find this guy's name. But in 1905, he comes over to the U.S. and he defeats the U.S. champion, and in 1905, so he now is united the American Championship and the European Championship. So guess what we now have? Our first wrestling world champion. And if you look any of the major wrestling companies, and this is nowadays, because if you look, the WWE, maybe AEW, but WWE for sure, I'm almost positive, New Japan, the NWA, all of them, if they trace all their championships back to this original world championship. So we have our first world champion, George Hackenschmidt. He's in good shape, but around that time, the thing was he was pretty dominant. He won all his matches, and these aren't like you think of your modern wrestling matches where you have slams and people jumping on the turnbuckle. No, these were a lot of holds, and like you would sit there and you're trying to take down a guy for 30 minutes. These matches last for hours. Some matches would go 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. they would last for fucking ever, dude.
I had a wrestling match with my high school coach once that lasted about an hour and a half. Lots of therapy after that one.
But we told you, Gus, that you weren't part of the wrestling team.
I was not
never part of the
wrestling team. I was not.
When you wrestle, you're supposed to wear pants,
and it was on a weekend
or a singlet.
And he told me that a regular jockstrap by itself was good enough. Original. He told me that was the way the.
You weren't in detention either, even though he kept telling you, "Oh, you're in detention again."
He detained me already, but it wasn't in detention. Son of a bitch.
We told you, Gus. We told you that it was just like what Father O'Hallahan did to me behind the Altar Society building. Not the same thing.
Just like my therapist said, if you pretend it didn't happen, it didn't happen.
Yeah, that's good therapy advice.
Yeah, he said just keep it on the side and don't let it out.
Let it bottle in, let it fester.
Yeah. He's a good therapist.
He's good. And
you give me 10 minutes at a time. Just tell me just stay angry, but
and he made sure he said, please don't ever talk to me about this again. In fact, you know what? Just leave now, but before you go, can you swipe your credit card?
Matter of fact, I think he quit therapy after doing me.
Oh, man. So George Hackenschmidt. So he's going around, and he is now the world champion, crowned in 1905. Well, basically, because he was so popular and so good, his managers were telling him, hey, let's decide, we need to start working these matches. Because people are getting bored of him winning every match and taking 5 hours. And also back then too, you had these traveling sideshows, and you had the wrestling match. You had the sideshow. So the wrestling wasn't like, okay, we have 5 matches. It was the match.
Yeah, you had Clawboy, you had the bearded woman, you had the
you had the bearded strong man who was also the woman.
And, exactly. And then you had what do you call it? Bunch of different half man, half animal bullshit attractions, and those are all the ones.
We told you those are my children. They're not a sideshow attraction. We advanced forward a few years, so there's other big names in the wrestling scene, especially in America, and one of them is Frank Gotch. Frank Gotch is another young guy, and he's won multiple matches. I think his final record was 2,000 wins and 5 losses, some crazy shit like that.
Yeah, that wasn't fake at all.
Yeah, maybe not. But the thing was, back then, this is a really important thing. Even though these guys worked matches, how they would agree to it is they would say, "Look, before the match, I'm going to win," and basically the only thing they would also agree on is when the crowd was getting restless, or maybe they figure it's the right time. Okay, we're gonna end the match. And there'd be the final deciding pinfall. And other than that, though, it was all pretty much just mostly real in the ring. And George Hackenschmidt was a real strongman. He was tough. Yeah. Frank Gotch was a really good wrestler. Pretty much, even up until the 1980s, that was true. The world champion was a legitimate tough guy. And we'll get more into that a little bit for a reason why. But let's talk. I want to talk about Frank Gotch and his rivalry with George Hackenschmidt, because this is basically Rocky IV before Rocky IV was ever a thing. Okay. So imagine you got this big, muscular Russian. Yeah. He's undefeatable. He's one of the world's strongest men. Yeah. He's using all these advanced training techniques. And you got Frank Gotch, who is the all-American farm boy. It fucking writes itself, right? Yeah. This is this is not even the Soviet Union. This is fucking Russian Empire. Long live Tsar Nicholas II. Big shout out to Tsar Nicholas II. In 1908, they meet in Chicago. And this is Ali Frazier. This is Magic Johnson versus Larry Bird. This is that big matchup.
Me versus gonorrhea.
Yeah, you versus gonorrhea. Yeah. The matchup we've all been looking forward to. We've been hyping
sometimes I win, sometimes I lose. Yeah, either way I win. So
but everyone's excited for this match. Got it. Remember back then, how people found out was through the newspaper. Radio was barely even a thing in 1908. So people are hearing about this, and it's the world title match against this guy who's won a fuck ton of matches, and they wrestle for about an hour. So this is kind of short by their standards. So the first fall happens, and Hackenschmidt has already been kind of injured. He kind of came in the match with an injury, and he kind of is injured. And after the first match, his words were, "I surrender the championship of the world, Mr. Gotch." Got up, shook his hand, walked out. Well, the problem is, it's a best 2 out of 3 falls match. He doesn't come back out. So he basically gives up the title and basically said the reason why he did it is he felt tired. He felt that Gotch was better than him and that he felt like his muscles were giving out. And so this is 1908. So Gotch is now the champion. Frank Gotch is now the champion.
So he just gave up the title.
He just
like
gave
a
him,
little bitch.
yeah, he gave him the title like a little bitch.
Yeah.
So check this out.
Fucking hack squat.
So exactly. So you know about the screw job, right?
Yeah.
The big wrestling screw job, right?
The Montreal screw job.
No. We're going back to the OG screw job.
I thought it was Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels.
They had a screw job. Maybe we'll talk about that one day. Yeah. But let's talk about the Frank Gotch, George Hackenschmidt screw job.
Oh shit! It gets deeper, huh?
So in Chicago, 30,000 fans. And remember, this is 1911, and there's 30,000 fans in Comiskey Park.
God, man, that's more fans than
the White Sox ever get. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I mean the White Sox wish they could pull that in.
No shit.
So they're gonna have a rematch. Well, apparently, years later, one of the guys who's working with Hackenschmidt to train him injures him in purpose training, takes out his knee, he fucks up his knee, and Hackenschmidt really can't train. He doesn't take his training seriously, and his knee's fucked up.
Why?
Because they knew the match was coming up. It was a purpose. They fucked up his knee so he couldn't regain the title. They were afraid that Hackenschmidt at 100% would be a challenge, a legitimate challenge. Because remember, these guys are the real deal. They're actually good amateur wrestlers.
So now Gotch is so popular that they don't want him to live.
Yeah, exactly.
Hackenschmidt's the old guy.
Yeah.
This is a new fucking generation.
Yeah. So after 20 minutes...
So they Vince McMahon his ass.
Yeah, exactly. After 20 minutes, Gotch is now pinned Hackenschmidt twice, and the people are pissed. Because they're expecting a 3-hour spectacle. This is like you get the big UFC main event, and it ends in the second round, and it's not even an exciting KO. You're just like, oh, that's it? That fucking sucked. Yeah. I paid $80 for this shit.
And the difference between then and now is that now entertainment's everywhere. It's in your phone.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
And that's all you have.
You're desensitized to shit. Back then,
that's all you had. That's all you had.
You spend
a hay penny.
You
spent your hay penny, which was you know how much you're in that in like 2 years working in the coal mine.
Right. And you're over there. You want 3 hours of entertainment to distract you from the fact that your life is miserable,
and you're probably dying of gonorrhea like us,
and you're suffering from black lung.
And you're dying of gonorrhea like us.
Well, first of all, the antibiotics worked on the original gonorrhea, but the super gonorrhea is a little tougher. But we're working on it, brother.
We're working on it. You know what? You will be surprised what medical science can do. So
shout out to experimental science.
Big shout out to experimental. You know what? Let's click that one. It's experimental antibiotics. Anyways, so I want to jump forward a little bit. Let's jump forward to 1920. You've heard of Ed Strangler Lewis?
Yeah.
So he was another famous wrestler. He ended up being... Sorry, spoiler alerts here. He ended up winning the world title 5 different times. Well, eventually he met with 2 other people named Joseph Tootsmont and Billy Sandow.
Sandow, I know, because the bodybuilding title is the tattoo is named after him.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, the other guy sounds like a fucking pervert.
Yeah, he probably was. Let's be honest. It's a 1920s white guy. He probably was a pervert.
Butt Toot, what was his name?
Joseph Tootsmont.
Okay,
it's a butt toot.
Yeah, but
so Billy Sandow was his manager. By the way, Damien Sandow, that's where his name came from. So anyways, they all got together. Ed Strangler Lewis was the wrestler. Billy Sandow was the manager. And the promoter was Tootsmont. And they came up with the idea that Strangler Lewis, who had already competed for the title several times, they're going to have him win the title. And he's a legitimate wrestler, too. He's another tough guy. He's a legitimate wrestler.
Yeah, if your nickname has the word Strangler in it, you're pretty much either a badass or you're
a pervert.
Yeah, or you like getting strangled.
Yeah, exactly. Or, big shout out to David Carradine. Anyways.
Hang tight, buddy.
He's a little too tight. Anyways, so we go up to them because they form a trio called the Gold Dust Trio. Yes, Gold Dust is named after the Gold Dust Trio.
Oh my God, this is like you're giving me all these names and I that's okay. That's
so
cool.
For those who don't know, there was a professional wrestler named Gold Dust, still active wrestling today, pretty famous guy.
Dustin Rhodes. His dad was the original All-American Dusty Rhodes. If you know who Dusty Rhodes is, then you are very much either way too young. You're born after 2000 probably. Yeah. And you were not allowed to watch TV, or you were just a piece of garbage.
I still believe to this day that I want to be the son of a plumber thanks to Dusty Rhodes. I'm pretty sure it's a combination of Dusty Rhodes and Officer Carl Winslow, and who raised me as a dad. Oh, and Uncle Phil. Uncle Phil's also my dad.
Yeah,
it's a combination of those three guys.
Yeah,
and my dad.
If I had to build a white Urkel, you'd probably be it.
You know what? I'll take the compliment because Jaleel White made a lot of money. Anyways, so they agree that eventually they want Strangler Lewis to win the championship, which he does, and then they're going to have him hold on to it. Well, the other thing is, besides having him hold on to it, they reach out to a whole bunch of other wrestlers and say, hey, right now, fans are getting bored with this style. You have these 3-5 hour long matches, and especially if they're a lot of these guys with a Greco-Roman background, they stay above the waist, they do the locks. More modern wrestling by this time has moved a lot more to the below the waist takedowns. Like Frank Gotch was famous for his toe hold, and so they started moving more, but they eventually.
So basically, their works, it's fake. They know who's going to win, but they're still using traditional wrestling moves.
A lot of these moves were based on European catch-can wrestling,
right? Which,
if you know anything about MMA, that's still part of it. Catch-can wrestling is still incorporated in MMA.
Shoot wrestling is still style.
Yeah, exactly.
Style.
Exactly. Shoot wrestling is catch-can. A lot of these guys use a lot of aspects from, I think, like traditional Irish wrestling. That's why it's called the Irish whip. It was the Irish collar and elbow lockup. That's why they call it the collar and elbow now. So a lot of these old maneuvers were based on old wrestling techniques, which were real wrestling techniques, real takedowns. Real holds. So what they decided to do is they came with a style they called the slam bang style. Basically, the idea was that besides just grappling, they wanted to start throwing in strikes, fisticuffs. And besides that, they also wanted to add slams, suplexes, arm drags, hip tosses. Does this sound familiar? It sounds like the origin of modern pro wrestling. Slam bang style.
Slam bang style. That's a style I use when I go to Norway.
That's the name of my porno. Anyways, the slam bang style. So the other thing is also besides saying that, hey, blah 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 is going to go over blah blah, they shortened the matches, but they made them more exciting. So instead of just two guys grappling, holding each other for hours, now you have two guys wrestling, and why they're wrestling each other? Because one wants to pick up and slam the other one, but the other one wants to hit him with a fist. The Gotch Hackenschmidt match, Gotch apparently threw a punch, and Hackenschmidt went right to the referee. He was like, his bullshit. Now look at wrestling matches. How often do they throw forearms, elbow strikes, punches, kicks, all the fucking time?
Yeah. But going back to what you said, I don't see anything wrong with holding each other for hours.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, but that's not a different podcast.
That's how we prepared for this podcast. I mean, nothing.
But not each other. We didn't hold each other.
Yeah. I mean, we could have.
Well, we thought about it.
What they also do is, because the matches are now shorter but more exciting, they said, hey, we can't just have one big match anymore. So they go up to other wrestlers and be like, hey, work with us. You could get more work now, because instead of being the one big match in fucking Peoria, Illinois, be one of the guys on the card in Chicago. And now you have 2, 3, 4, 5 matches all going on. So the matches are now shorter, and because they're shorter, people can wrestle more matches per week, per month, instead of like, fuck, I just wrestled 5 hours. I ain't gonna wrestle today.
And you have to put that much more into
that.
Instead of just working one hold for 30 minutes. Yeah. Now you have to do all the action in there to keep the crowd.
Exactly. You're working the hold so you can pick up and slam a guy, or you pick up a guy and throw him in the rope so you can hit him with an elbow. Right. And also on top of that, Toots Mont said, you know what's the most important thing? Just like a good book or good movie, what's the most important thing? The ending. You gotta have a good ending, right? Same thing. Let's have a good finish for the match. So it wasn't just, okay, Gus, you're going to beat me in 30 minutes. It's, no, Gus, you're going to beat Rene with a spinning toe hold after you pick him up and slam him, hit him with a body slam and hit him with a spinning toe hold. Crowd's going to go apeshit because they get the big slam, they get the submission, I give up.
They get the happy ending.
Yeah, they get their happy ending, just like everybody wants. They want the happy ending. Everyone wants to go home happy.
Yeah, exactly.
They want to see one grown man make another man cry while they're both mostly naked.
That's
not your happy ending?
That's a happy ending.
Oh, okay.
It's not my favorite one, but you know what? I'll take it.
It goes all into the 1920s, and it's popular. Ed Strangler Lewis. The other thing they realized is he couldn't just win all the time. So every once in a while they'd have him lose the title to someone else. They hold it for a while, and he'd come back and win it. But he ended up holding the title 5 different times, and he eventually Strangler Lewis. Like I said, him and Sandow eventually split up when they've had multiple disagreements, and Toots Mont end up training a lot of different people. Jim Londos, who I'm going to mention next, one of the biggest drawing world champions of all time. Stu Hart, he trains Stu Hart. Yeah,
I know that name.
Jack Pfeffer. He even would actually be a mentor to Vince McMahon Sr. Yeah, and he was the one who convinced Vince McMahon to give a guy named Bruno Sammartino the championship, supposedly.
Nice.
Yeah, so he had a big role in wrestling history. So even though he had a weird pervert name, butt tutor, but at the same time he was pretty solid.
Okay.
So
good props.
We're gonna jump a little bit. So we talked about the United Kingdom a little bit, and the United Kingdom still has a lot of wrestling. Actually, a lot of it kind of decreased in the 30s. They actually got banned for a while in the United Kingdom. Eventually got unbanned and became popular again. And we won't talk about this podcast, but there was other things on the TV shows, World of Sport and other stuff that got popular.
It's why you would ban something that's not real violence. I guess it was just because it was a type of violence. They're
European, dude.
It was a type of violence.
They're European. They're European. Well, actually, I'm going to make before we move on to another country, I want to briefly talk about one thing. And I know it wouldn't be something that we normally do here on the podcast, but we're going to talk about one woman. One thing they would also do in the cards to attract people is they would have kind of like sideshow attractions even it. They would have a mud wrestling, even just the guys. But they would also have women's wrestling. And Mildred Burke was pretty famous because she went up to what would eventually be her future promoter, her husband, Billy Wolf, said, train me. And she's maybe only 5'2", not very tall. And he said, no, I don't want to train you. She's like, no, I want you to train me. So he got one of the male wrestlers to pick her up and slam her. Then she got up, picked him up, and slammed the wrestler right back. He's like, all right, cool, I'll train you. So I like her.
Nothing gets you your way better than violence.
Yeah, exactly. So eventually, among other things, not only would she become the women's world champion, but I want to use her as an example of what a lot of these guys would do as a sideshow. They'd be like, okay, I'm the champion, or any wrestler. They would throw out matches to the crowd, be like, hey, if anybody can last 5-10 minutes in the ring with me, you get $2,000. The problem
it's like Spider-Man and Buzzsaw.
Exactly, it's Spider-Man and Bonesaw. I got you for 3 minutes of playtime. Oh yeah! Oh, beautiful.
Shout out to the Macho Man.
Big shout out to the Macho Man. It wouldn't be a wrestling podcast if we didn't mention him. Besides wrestling women, she was trained by men. And even though she was not that big, she was pretty muscular. She was pretty strong. So she would tell them, she's like, all right, if any guy in the audience thinks he can beat me, we'll pay you whatever amount of money. Well, they'd come up to the ring and they didn't realize she's actually. This is like if I went in the ring and fought the women's world champion of MMA.
Amanda Nunes.
Exactly. Amanda Nunes would choke my ass out.
We would get our ass handed to us.
Exactly. Well, the same thing. These guys didn't realize that she also is the real deal. So they go in there, she fucking pick them up, slam them down, choke them out, and they'd be like, oh shit, I'm giving up. And so even more sideshow, and plus not to mention all the buddies can make fun. He's like, dude, that woman just whooped your ass like square.
And I would say, yeah, and I was embarrassed and got a boner at the same time.
And you know what?
I got a
worthwhile boner.
I got a Shane boner.
But you know what? Solid 8 out of 10 Shane boner.
That's most of my boners. Shane boners.
I actually can't get it up anymore without Shane. Anyways, so I just want to make a brief detour to her because she's pretty cool. She's actually got a really interesting life story. Kind of sad too. She got screwed out of a lot of stuff by her husband. He's a giant asshole. But anyways, we're gonna move to a different country. We're gonna move to a great country. Mexico.
Oh, where my people came from and refried beans were created.
Anyway, so we're now in the 1930s in Mexico City. So we jump forward a little bit in time, and a new company starts called EMLL. If this sounds familiar, it's because they're the world's longest running company. They're now called CMLL, and if you turn into any of the Spanish stations on a Saturday, you can watch CMLL right now. So it's been seriously going on for almost 100 years. They have a lot of tradition.
Yeah.
And they originally so kind of funny enough, the original stars of EMLL were actually Americans. And a lot of them, because they were going across the border, they didn't want to wrestle under the same name. So what did they do? Put on a mask. Exactly. Gus just pantomime putting on a mask. He's 100% correct. And so the first ever one was called the Masked Marvel. There's some other people that got popular known as the Masked Wrestler and other stuff. Well, eventually what really took off wasn't just Americans wearing masks, but Mexicans wearing masks, and they got really popular. And that's where the traditional lucha libre was born. So real quick, to kind of differentiate the various styles of wrestling. So we talked about catch as catch can. European wrestling, especially British wrestling, is a lot about holds. So very decorated amateur wrestling, submissions, Some depending on the style. Like in certain parts of England, they'll use like finger holds, toe holds. Very brutal, like just trying to cripple people type of
Strong
holds.
style stuff.
Yeah, and exactly, very brutal like submission. Americans are more flashier. We like the big guy. We like the big guys picking each other up and slamming each other down. The slam bang. So a lot of suplexes and a lot more movement. Well, that eventually Mexico picks up that and takes it to the next level. So if any of you have ever watched Lucha Libre,
that's where the high flyers.
The high flyers. So you got people even in the 50s and 60s jumping off the ropes, wearing masks, and these masks would tell a lot. The original mask, like, and we'll get to the most famous luchador of all time in a moment. His match was just all silver, very very plain, but it still spoke a lot about their characters. And if you ever watch Lucha Libre, completely different American wrestling. A lot of 6-man tags. The rules are different. You just roll out of the ring. You can tag in. You have to pin the captain or the other 2 members of the team at the same time. But you can also see they do suplexes, they do grapples, they have submission maneuvers. It's all borrowed. You can see the evolution of wrestling as this. But they had their own flares. They jump off the top rope way before Americans ever did it. They use springboard maneuvers, a lot more coordinated. Some people say Lucha Libre looks the most fake because there's obviously a lot of coordination with the maneuvers.
Yeah, a lot more but it's gymnastic elements.
Right, but it's also the most athletic. And really, a lot of American wrestling probably comes from basically Mexico and especially Gory Guerrero. He invented like a lot of submission maneuvers, a lot of athletic maneuvers, and then the Japanese invented a lot. We'll get to them in a minute.
If you look at
and plus it's the white man stealing from Mexicans again.
Yeah, bastards. Anyway, but if you look at the influence, you look at anybody who watches wrestling nowadays, the best wrestlers have some kind of combination of all.
Correct.
You can't just be an on the ground freaking guy that never leaves his feet anymore because those guys are boring as hell. The only guys that can do that are the ones that are like 7 feet.
Yeah.
The strong Braun Strowman.
Yeah.
And guys like
Andre the Giant,
Undertaker's, Andre the Giant guys.
Well, I mean, you even had guys like William Regal, who, yes, he was very well versed in the catch as catch can, but he also traveled the world and adapted. Everyone did. Yeah. Same thing. Even the luchadors, a lot of them will go to Japan and learn stuff. Some will come to America and learn. And actually, just a quick aside, a lot of wrestlers would do that. They would go and they, especially in like the 70s and 80s, even a little bit the early 90s. To become better wrestlers, okay, they start off in America. They maybe wrestle in Tennessee and then go to the Carolinas and then maybe New York and Texas. And they say, okay, now I'm going to go to Mexico for a year. And after that, I'm going to go to Japan for a year. After that, I'll go to England and then come back. Now they're even bigger star. Yeah. And now their style's a little more versatile because now they've learned Japanese Porosu wrestling. They've learned Lucha Libre. They'll learn catch as catch can.
Brian Daniels.
He's the perfect example of this guy. He was, high flyer, submission, brawling.
Yeah, he wrestled in Mexico too.
Yeah,
masked.
Yeah,
he was El Generico or something like that. Or
no, that was Sami Zayn.
Was that Sami Zayn? Oh no, the American Dragon.
Yeah.
The American Dragon.
Yeah, and so he learned all that too. So, but anyways, let's get back to the olden days.
Yeah. Sorry.
So that's all good. EML's running, and eventually they get this one Mexican wrestler who, in his first match, I believe he wins a battle royal. His name's El Santo. Fans pick up on him immediately. He's not necessarily tall, but good physical condition, good looking, obvious charisma from under the mask. If you don't know El Santo, basically it's like saying, hey, I don't know who Superman is. Like this guy is like the Mexican fucking Superman. He's in movies, he's in TV shows. Legitimately,
that was a big thing in Mexico. Is a lot of these wrestlers were so popular that they became legitimate movie stars.
Yeah, they were,
and they wore their masks the whole time.
Yeah. So El Santo is even famous for this. Like the Lucha Libre mask is sacred. Is 100% sacred. In fact, wagering the mask is even more important than wagering your championship in Mexico because you lose your identity in essence. Mm-hmm. You lose the mask, you lose your identity, and there's actually legitimately a committee in Mexico that governs, how you lose your mask. And there are people who petition it, and usually what they have to do is get a new wrestling identity. The old one has lost its mask. If you want to wrestle again under mask, you gotta get a new wrestling identity. Yeah. And so El Santo is famous because he never lost his mask. B, he only revealed his face once in public ever. These guys do interviews most of these guys do interviews in their mask.
And he was buried in his mask.
He was buried in his mask.
Actually, a few of the old Mexican masked wrestlers were buried in their mask.
I believe Blue Demon was also.
Blue Demon, Mil Máscaras.
Yeah.
El Rey de Plata,
Yeah, they were all buried. So these masks, like, you could legitimately lose anything else. Your mask is like losing your identity.
Yeah.
He's getting huge, very popular. In fact, with the popularity of this, and I'm just going to jump slightly ahead and we'll come back more to it. Eventually in the 50s, EMLL becomes the Mexican NWA territory. And so eventually, we'll get to it, but NWA has these official promotions they recognize all over the world. And EML becomes the Mexican one. So it really is taken off as the big Mexican territory. We're going to the 30s, we're going to the 40s. We've talked about El Santo, and then I want to briefly jump to the 50s. We're going to go back to America briefly before we go back to Japan. I want to mention one guy. This guy you probably have heard of. He was pretty famous in the 40s and 50s. Gorgeous George. You familiar with him?
Yeah, I know the name. He was the guy that started all the flair and really started all the flair and the fancy robes and acting like a little bitch. Basically.
Exactly. So before, all these guys, yes, they have names and stuff, but they were not like, when you think of pro wrestling, you think of these larger than life characters. Right. You think of guys with catchphrases and,
Right, before that, they were just plain names.
Yeah, plain names. They were the Strangler. Yeah, there was...
No outside personality.
Yeah. Now, Gorgeous George, and this is right when the Dumont Network is airing, TV's first becoming a thing, and there's only like 6 channels. So you go and you watch the wrestling, and you see this guy, dyed blonde hair, curly, wearing robes, acting very feminine. And this is 1950s America. You can imagine how much people fucking hated this guy. Fucking hated it. Wore perfume, pretty boy, glamour boy. He called himself the human orchid and would sometimes have an orchid pinned to his... Yeah, he actually even had ring music. He came out to Pomp and Circumstance, just like Randy Savage did.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He wore Chanel No. 5.
Oh, he went all out.
He went all out. People fucking hated him. Like, people would they'd watch 3 things in the 50s. Bob Hope, I Love Lucy, and wanted to see Gorgeous George get his fucking ass kicked.
I bet, I don't know if he did or not, but in my mind, he also wore a thong, and I just can't get that out of my head right now.
You know what? He probably, if thongs were a thing...
He was the first... He originated men wearing thongs.
Like, look at that. Look at that right there. That's a picture of him right there.
There's a thong right there somewhere.
There's definitely a thong in there. Long flowing robe.
I tried wearing a thong once, but I had it on backwards. I couldn't get it on right.
See, mine, as soon as I put it on, it got stuck right up my asshole. Too much pressure.
It's
too much pressure.
You coughed too hard.
Some say it's still up there to this day.
It's the legend of the lost asshole.
It's still up there to this day. So among influences who credit him, Muhammad Ali, James Brown, Classy Freddie Bassie, Henry Winkler, Randy Savage.
Oh, yeah,
yeah, Randy Savage, Ric Flair, Bob Dylan.
Really?
Yeah, they all credited him as meeting him in person, saying that they basically helped inspire him one way or another. Like, all the shit talking Muhammad Ali did?
Yeah. Okay.
Gorgeous George. Gorgeous George was the first person to cut what we call a promo, where he would talk shit about the other ones and rile up the competitors and rile up the fans. And James Brown with the whole crazy hair and the robes. Randy Savage with the big robes and coming out the pop and circumstance.
How he influenced the Fonz, though.
I'm sorry. I apologize. Henry Winkler did a movie about him.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. He did a movie about him.
The Fonz was like total opposite of that shit. But okay, I got
Now, he had a sad story. I'm going to cut to his end real quick. He died of liver cirrhosis, basically penniless, which is sad because he was only 48. Wow. Which is funny, too, because he legitimately did make a lot of money in his career. So now I'm jumping to another country, Japan. This is our final stop. Yeah. So Japan, and why Japan is generally considered one of the most sacred places for pro wrestling.
Everything they take and turn into like a national pastime or anything, they always attribute some. There's always ceremony, respect,
yeah, exactly,
and sacredness to it.
Yeah, if you want to say the 2 countries that treat pro wrestling the most seriously, it's Mexico and Japan. Mexicans generally respect luchadors and the mask and the tradition.
It's on the level of religion.
Yeah, and Japanese people like they're celebrities over there.
Yeah.
Pro wrestlers are celebrities. They're a form of celebrity. I want to mention one guy named Ricky Dozen. I don't know if you ever heard of him. So he was a Korean sumo wrestler. I want you to remember he's Korean. Okay, he actually made it decently far in sumo wrestling before he ended up having to retire from sumo wrestling. Eventually, in about 1950, 1951, he ends up deciding to becoming a pro wrestler. He says, it sounds pretty good. So eventually, in the early 50s, he starts wrestling. And at the time, there really wasn't many Japanese wrestlers. So again, a lot of American wrestlers are coming over. We have to remember, 1950s. What happened just a few years ago? World War II.
Right.
Obviously, American wrestlers aren't necessarily the most popular, right? Okay. So what do the Japanese want to cheer? Their good old home country guy. And who's going to do that? Sumo wrestler, Korean sumo wrestler, Ricky Dozen. They didn't know he was Korean at the time, but they're still cheering him on, and he's their national hero. So to give you an idea, one of the matches, I don't remember which one. It was either against Luthez.
But his first name was Ricky?
Ricky, last name Dozen. No, it's some Japanese.
So it's not like Ricky.
It was
like R-I-C-K-Y.
No, his real name was Mitsuhiro Momota, but he went by Ricky Dozen.
So they hated Americans, but they took a guy that had an American sounding name as. That wasn't even Japanese.
Yeah, his real name was Richard Nixon. There you go. I can't remember if it was against Luthez or Classy Freddie Bassie. It might have been Freddie Bassie because he tells the story where they did an 83 share in wrestling. To give you an idea what a share is, means the percentage of TVs watching the event. So literally, 4 out of 5 Japanese televisions were watching Ricky Dozen fight this American.
Wow.
And give you a brief on Classy Freddie Bassie, long-time wrestler, long-time manager. He used to file his teeth. And one of his gimmicks is he used to bite people. Yes, his name is Classy. He used to bite people in the ring. Well, the Japanese were so taken aback of this that several people allegedly died of heart attacks while watching this. And there's at least one truly documented death of a heart attack like this. And Freddie Blassie would always talk about how he goes, yeah, my matches were so violent, people used to die of heart attacks watching them. I mean, that's classic wrestling right there. If you know anything about wrestling, there's probably one old man who coincidentally died of a heart attack while watching it, and now he's killing people left and right with his matches.
He was already having chest pain, but he didn't want to miss the match.
Yeah, he can't miss Ricky Dozen. So he also has a sad life because Ricky Dozen eventually dies being murdered by the Yakuza. So we've had Mildred Burke die a sad death. We've with her husband leaving her, we had poor Gorgeous George. Now Ricky Dozen's been stabbed, but Ricky Dozen leaves a big legacy because he had 2 students who were really pretty popular.
Names some big names, aren't you?
Giant Baba, who founded All Japan Wrestling, and then Antonio Inoki, who founded New Japan Wrestling. Yeah,
and Antonio Inoki was like
he's awesome.
Yeah, they people know he was a wrestler, this type of wrestling, but Antonio Inoki was a legit original like style MMA kind of guy. He was a real fighter. If
you want to see something interesting on YouTube, look up Antonio Inoki versus Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing, but he was like a legitimate badass. Oh, like one of his quotes, like when I did doing jiu-jitsu, one of his quotes like people use all the time is just once in your life train like you don't care whether you live or die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And to give you an idea, Antonio Inoki, badass, mega badass chin. Like literally, people like up to this day will ask him to slap him. It's considered like a rite of passage to get slapped by Antonio Inoki in Japan. And Giant Baba is literally that. He's basically Japanese Andre Giant, 7 feet tall, kind of gangly but huge drawing. Very popular, and a lot of wrestlers liked him because apparently he was a super nice guy too. Treated his wrestlers super well.
Like Andre, unless he didn't like you.
Yeah, basically.
Or your name was Randy Savage.
Or who was the other guy he wanted to fight? I can't remember now. But anyways, I apologize. It was Luthez he fought, and it was an 87 rating. So that means literally 87% of Japanese televisions were watching Ricky Dozen. I forgot one brief one. So Ricky Dozen is probably the biggest drawing Japanese champion. The biggest drawing American was a guy actually named Jim Londos, who was a Greek, who is widely considered among other things, he was known for beating Strangler Lewis, a few other people, and is widely considered. I think if I remember, I saw him. He legitimately drew was the first guy to make like 6, maybe even 7 figures a year wrestling. And I think he used to draw crowds over 100,000. So like the biggest pro wrestling crowds ever in history were Jim Londo's matches.
Man, those were the days though where
you didn't have
so little other entertainment.
Yeah,
there was
because to give you an idea, when Jim Londo's
if you were good enough,
he wrestled in the 30s and 40s before the war, essentially.
Yeah, and
the NBA not a thing.
Yeah,
NHL not a thing.
And stories were more believable because there was no video. There was on demand television. There was no video. It was word of mouth.
Yeah,
it's like telling a story. Like people believed in myths back in the day. It's like it's a legend. So you hear about this legendary guy that's a badass and he beats the shit out of everybody. So now he's coming to my town.
He's coming. I gotta see him. He's a Greek hero too, just like Ricky Dozan was for the Japanese, El Santos for the Mexicans.
John Stamos.
And Jonathan Stamos,
Greek legend as well.
Big shout out to John Stamos. So luckily, I mean, he died of a heart attack, but as far as I know, he didn't have a sad ending. At least we're gonna jump forward. We're gonna jump a little back and forth.
Hopefully, it was in the middle of a happy ending.
You know what? I hope it was for Jim Londos. Big shout out to Jim Londos. So we've kind of jumped back and forth, but we're like in the late 40s now, late 40s, early 50s, and this is kind of like where I want to kind of reach the end of our podcast because there's one big thing founded called the NWA. NWA is still around, and you know who owns it right now? Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins.
Get out of here.
I'm not making that up.
He's a wrestling fan?
He's a huge wrestling fan, and he owns the NWA. The reason why this is important, remember how I told you George Hackenschmidt was a world champion, and then guys like Strangler Lewis, Jim Londos won the title? Well, eventually, you have all these people doing these promotions. The Toots Mondt had his own little promotion organizing, but you never really had a central body. Like how you think there's big governing boxing bodies and there's the NFL and all that. There really wasn't that at the time. So a bunch of promoters kind of got together and formed what's called the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance. Still around today, still has the NWA title. And eventually when the world title got discontinued, the NWA said, hey, our legacy's picking right off there. And the reason why I say that is because eventually NWA creates what's called a territory system. So let's say for example, you and I both have wrestling promotions and we're both promoting wrestling in Texas. Well, you and me hate each other. We both have wrestling promotions. I got my wrestlers.
It's real.
Yeah, very real.
I don't fucking like you, but
but we're trying to make money. Please sponsor us. Yes. Anyways, so the NWA reaches out to people and says, hey Gus, we like the way you run your wrestling promotion. We want you to now be NWA Texas. And with that, we'll have the NWA World Champion will come to your town. He'll wrestle one of your guys. And at the same time, if you want to talk to other NWA members, maybe get one of their wrestlers over for big matches, or maybe becomes wrestlers in Texas a while, and then you send one of your guys over, and they could go wrestle in Oregon or California or North Carolina, and and the NWA champion basically would go around all over the country and defend the title, and he was a huge draw because he's the NWA champion. One of the early and most famous one of these was Luthez. I mentioned he the guy who drew the big match against Ricky Dozan because he's the fucking NWA champion. And so eventually Japanese pro wrestling becomes NWA Japan. EMLL is the big one. There's a few other ones. There's one called Capital Wrestling Corporation, which if anyone really remembers their history, eventually becomes Worldwide Wrestling Federation, which becomes the World Wrestling Federation, which becomes WWE. Exactly. So a lot of other people join this. Vern Gagne becomes the NWA champion. He eventually creates the American Wrestling Association. You wrestling historians will recognize a few of these names. Killer Kowalski becomes champion. Freddie Blassie, I believe, becomes champion. But anyways, and each part of America is claimed by a territory. And it was like a little cabal because the board of directors, which was basically all the promotion owners, would get together and decide, hey, who's going to be world champion? And if you were the NWA champion, you had to be the real fucking deal.
So going back, basically, like you said before, you had a promotion, I had a promotion in Texas. We didn't like each other. But NWA came to me, and I signed with them, so you're fucked.
I'm fucked because you're getting the NWA champion. I'm not. Guys are coming over now from North Carolina to wrestle Texas. Oh, hey, I read in the papers about that guy. He's supposed to be badass. The guy from New York is coming down here to wrestle.
And you're just stuck with midget wrestling.
And I'm just stuck with midget wrestling. Exactly. And even then, the best midget goes and joins your company, and I'm screwed. So, and now you can see if you want to join the NWA, and it's pretty advantageous to join the NWA because you now get the NWA champion is touring all over the world. This is a big deal being the NWA champion. You have not only you're basically working 300 plus days a year, probably close to 365 days a year, but you're making 6 figures a year. You're pretty nationally famous, and the NWA championship claims its lineage goes all the way to George Hackenschmidt. So now you have a title who claims lineage is already 43, 50 years old. Okay. You know, so it seems like a big deal. The problem is when you have this big group, not everybody's equal, right? Some guys are bigger, some guys are stronger.
Yeah.
And eventually in the early 60s, a guy named Vincent J. McMahon, or Vince Sr., says, hey, you know, I kind of want more days with the NWA champion. I said, no, but I run New York. I run Madison Square Garden. I deserve to have more days over this. And then he had a champion called Buddy Rogers, Nature Boy Buddy Rogers.
Oh, yeah, the original Nature Boy.
The original Nature Boy Buddy Rogers. He didn't want him to lose the title to Luthez because Buddy Rogers is his guy. So the most dates he's going to work as the NWA champion are in New York. Yeah. And Luthez is not his guy. Well, they said, no, Luthez is going to win. He's going to win again. So eventually Luthez wins in only one fall instead of best of 3, another screw job. So Vince McMahon says, fuck you, I'm succeeding. And I'm going to create the Worldwide Wrestling Federation and start my own championship. And Buddy Rogers could be the first ever champion. And that's exactly what he did. He created the precedent of, hey, I can make my own championship.
Yeah.
And move on from there. And then most famously, Buddy Rogers lost his title to a little guy named Bruno Sammartino. And if you know anything about him, he legitimately held the WWF title for like 10 years at one point. Sounds like it would be boring, but fucking people love this guy. Anyways,
he was a legit, like,
he looks like a brick shithouse.
Yeah, and
he's shorter than me, but he's built like a brick shithouse.
He probably became the legitimate first nationwide wrestling celebrity.
Yeah,
where you had the other ones that were big names when they were traveling.
Well, but remember, he was on TV.
Yeah,
he was on TV.
Yeah, that's why
he was coming out of Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, and that's why he was like the first legit like not the first wrestling superstar, but the first one that was well known anywhere, exactly, and everywhere.
Now, but also remember, because they broke off from NWA, they're saying, hey, we saw that title lineage, so we go back to the NWA and we go back to George Hackenschmidt. And they created that precedent too. And guess what? When All American the AWA, Vern Gagne says, hey, I want to make my own money, he splits off. Guess what? He traces that lineage. So now the following companies have claimed this lineage at one way of going all the way back to George Hackenschmidt. The WWF, TNA/Impact Wrestling, All Japan Pro Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, Ring of Honor, Jim Crockett Promotions /World Championship Wrestling, Eastern Championship Wrestling, which was later known as Extreme Championship Wrestling. Pretty much I think the only major world title in wrestling is probably AEW, is probably the only one who can interest just because it's so new.
Yeah.
Other than that, pretty much.
Eventually they will.
They probably find a way. But if you ever want to see just type of Wrestling World Championship lineage or the WWE Championship lineage, it's kind of interesting. It gets a little more confusing.
I've actually gone back and claimed other people as my dad as well.
You know what's funny?
I don't know if that's the same or not.
I've also claimed him to be the world champion. I'm going to claim that Ric Flair is my dad.
Yeah, George Hackenschmidt is actually my great grandfather, and he actually raped one of my ancestors in Mexico. And that's how I came.
So now the last thing I'm going to end on was another promotion forming and splitting away from the NWA. It's called Jim Crockett Promotions. And Jim Crockett Sr. had originally founded it. It was owned by Jim Crockett Jr. And eventually Jim Crockett Promotions merges with Dusty Rhodes, Florida, Championship Wrestling Florida, and a couple other ones because of World Championship Wrestling. Then we get more to modern wrestling we know today. So I don't want to talk about that. A lot of people know about that. I watched it. You watched it. But that's kind of the origin of pro wrestling. It just kind of came from this carnival roots into, and you saw the evolution from, okay, 2 guys wrestled each other for 5 hours in fucking wrestling trunks. Maybe a championship belt.
Old traditional holds.
Exactly, to people who are now wrestling. Like, we're reaching the 70s. You're having steel cage matches. You're having blood. You're having more gimmick matches. not quite to the way we have today, but you're now seeing wrestling that looks like wrestling today.
And 70s, so now steroids are taking off, and you're getting way bigger, muscular, buff guys.
Billy Graham, superstar Billy Graham,
more comic book looking.
Yeah,
guys.
if you want to see where Jesse Ventura and Hulk Hogan got their look up superstar Billy Graham.
Yeah. His look influenced like
everybody.
A bunch of different options.
Yeah, if you want if you wanted to take all the original pro wrestlers, you would take probably like the strength of George Hackenschmidt, like the toughness of Harley Race, the flair of Buddy Rogers and Gorgeous George, the look of superstar Billy Graham, and that's where you create the modern pro wrestler.
Yeah,
and that's where it all comes from. You have the big buff, roided out dude who's telling you what you're gonna do, brother, and while wearing big robes, coming out to fucking flashy music. And just making a big scene. And when you punch him in the face, you realize he didn't even blink. You're like, oh fuck, I fucked up.
Yeah, fucking legitimate tough guys.
What did you learn something today, Gus?
I did. I learned a lot. I learned about the butt tutor, and then which was probably my favorite part. But yeah, man, I did.
So you learned next to nothing then?
No. Well, I mean, it's. I'm gonna forget it all within 30 minutes because I have brain damage. But no, I didn't. Like I said, I knew a decent amount of history. I didn't not, and I never went that far back.
Yeah.
Obviously, I probably have more of a life than you do. That's why I never got.
That is correct. I have no life.
That was pretty interesting. Okay, I did learn something, and I became smarter and dumber at the same time. And just like I was hoping this podcast would.
I would like to feel that this podcast is the equivalent of taking a steel chair to the head, but then afterwards you read some Shakespeare.
Yeah. It's like you're taking the limitless pill and getting shot in the brain at the same time.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So
good stuff, man. I'm glad I finally got to.
I'm glad you finally got to record with us. Next week or next episode, I honestly don't know what's going to happen. Ray hopefully will come back from Eastern Europe or Central Europe, or I'm not going to lie, don't remember where Croatia is at right now.
Yeah, she's probably blowing somebody in Eastern Europe somewhere.
Someone's. So Gus has not heard any of the podcast episodes of the fact that he talked about Ray blowing people because she's trying to establish her country. That's literally what we talked about last week. Dude. That's literally what we talked about.
I'm not surprised that that's the tactic she used.
That's how she formed diplomatic relations. Yes. Blowing everybody.
And she's in her early 20s, mid 20s, and has knee problems. She's got
severe knee problems.
I think she's already had surgery on a torn meniscus.
She has basically no fluid there.
A torn meniscus. That's when she was getting her degree in her career
in international relations.
Yes, international blow relations.
You can do better. You can do better.
I can do better.
You can do better. You can do better.
I can
so,
do better.
Don't know what we're going to talk about next time. I don't even know who's going to be the host with me next time, or if I'm even going to be on the podcast. Maybe we'll get a Ray and Gus episode.
Nah. I'd probably end up slapping her. She bores me.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. All right. So we'll find out what happens next time. Love you guys. We'll see you later. Bye.
Later.